Well, here we are right here, right now, Right Time Reborn. The reason we're calling it Right Time Reborn is it's been 11 years since Right Time Radio was on the air, or since I've been on the air with Right Time Radio, back up in Kingston, New York. A lot of you folks who listen to this will have no idea who I am. You've never heard me. Like I said, it's been 11 years since I've been broadcasting. My name is Imre Beke. That's I-M-R-E-B-E-K-E. That's the last time I'm going to spell that for you. And I used to be the host of a radio show back up in Kingston, New York, upstate New York, a show called Right Time Radio on WKNY 1490 AM. I had an awesome co-host, a guy named Ed Gaddy. I'm hoping to be able to somehow make this work where he can be part of this show again, because we had a great time doing that show for many years together. Ed is still up there in upstate New York. I'm trying to convince him to come down here. Where's here? Here is Citrus County, Florida. Citrus County, Florida is about an hour and a half north of Tampa on the Gulf Coast. And it is one of the greatest places in the country. I love living here in Citrus County, Florida. It is free. It is open. We got a county where there are more Republicans than anybody else. 60% of the county is Republican. There are more Republicans here than independents, than third party, than Democrats combined. And you know who's in third place? Third place are the Democrats, behind the independents. Republicans come first, then independents, who vote about 2-1 Republican, and then the Democrats. They have no voice left here. So if you live in a socialist hellhole like New York or California or Massachusetts or Oregon, this is a place to consider. Citrus County, New York rocks. This is like the greatest place to be. And I've been here several years, and I love being here. So anyway, I'm going to shout out once again to my old co-host, Ed Gaddy. He's just the greatest guy. And I'm hoping we'll be able to get him to be part of this show, because we had so much chemistry together when we were on the air for I don't even know how many years up in WKNY. And boy, oh boy, am I sorry about what's happened to that radio station. The station that I used to be on every week is now owned by some lefty nonprofit run by Warren Buffett's kid. I don't even know what to say about that. But at any rate, we got a state down here in Florida that is second to none when it comes to freedom, when it comes to liberty, when it comes to conservative traditional values. It's unbelievable. And it's getting more and more conservative every day, thanks in large part to the greatest governor in the U.S. today, Ron DeSantis. If you've ever heard the guy speak, he is amazing. If you've ever looked at what he believes and what he has achieved here in Florida, he is astonishing. We haven't seen the likes of him since Ronald Reagan. Maybe he's not quite as good as Ronald Reagan, but he is an amazing leader. And thank heaven, as a Floridian, for our Governor Ron DeSantis. So anyway, so Right Time Reborn is going to be just like Right Time Radio was back when I was doing it in New York. It's going to be a once a week, 1 hour show recapping some of the politics in the country today. And we're going to be examining things. We're going to be analyzing things. We're going to be looking at how things work. And we're going to just have some fun with it. Because right now, we Republicans, we conservatives, we have momentum. We are on a roll. We've got some great people who are heading up this party. We got some great people who are pushing the conservative values and traditions on which this country was built. We've got the Democrats on the run. I mean, look at what's going on in the House. Look at all the conservative bills that have been passed in just the last couple of weeks. It's unbelievable. But before we get to that, let me give you a little bit of background about myself. You might have noticed that my name is a little bit unusual. That's because my parents were both refugees from communist Hungary. My mom left in 1945 when she was 3 years old. I'll get to that in a minute as to why. My father left when he was 15, a few months after the 1956 revolution. My mom left because my grandfather, her dad, such a smart guy. Unfortunately, I was about 9 years old when he passed, so I didn't get to know him very well, but he was an incredibly bright, smart guy. He spoke 7 or 8 languages. He was a newspaper editor in Hungary during the war. Actually started before the war. And he could not stand the idea of despotism, of authoritarianism, of dictatorship. So he wrote these editorials, these op-eds against both the Soviets and the Nazis, right in the middle of the war. So when the Nazis invaded, they made a beeline for Budapest. My grandfather lived just about an hour or so outside the city. Luckily, they never got as far as the city where he lived, because one of the first things they did is they looked at all the people who publicly opposed Nazism. And they put all these people on trial. If they could get a hold of them, they put them on trial live. If they couldn't, they did it in absentia. And they put my grandfather on trial in absentia. Of course, they found him guilty of whatever it was whatever made up crime that they wanted to accuse him of. And then they sentenced him to death. Luckily, they didn't have him in their hands. A few months later, the Soviets came in and they invaded the entire country. And so my grandfather made straight for the Austrian border with my grandmother and with my mother, who was 3 years old at the time. And they got out of the country before he could be arrested, because the Soviets also put him on trial in absentia, also sentenced him to death. All right. So my grandfather was sentenced to death twice for standing up for freedom. And thank heaven he got out of there. But they spent most of the next 12 years living in They spent all the next 12 years living in Germany. Most of those years living in what were called displaced persons camps, refugee camps, among the poorest places on earth. That's where my mother basically grew up until when she was 15 years old. They were allowed to come to the United States. Now, my grandfather, the reason it took 12 years for him to get out here is because my grandfather had a spot on his lung that showed up on all the x-rays. So they would not allow my mom's family to come to the U.S. because they were concerned that my grandfather might have tuberculosis. For 12 years? But my grandparents, they didn't break the law. They didn't hire smugglers. They didn't find some way to come to the U.S. illegally. They waited their turn. They stood in line. They respected the laws of this country and waited for 12 years in refugee camps before finally being allowed to come to the U.S. legally. That's the way real immigrants do it. They do it legally. And that's what my grandfather, my grandmother, and my mom did. So she was 15 years old when she came to the U.S. My dad, he was an orphan, basically. I mean, my grandmother was alive, but my dad's father died when he was only a year old. And my grandmother was part of the underground in 1945 when the Nazis invaded, and she hid Jewish Hungarians in her home, in her little one-bedroom apartment, as part of the underground, keeping them there for a few days until they were taken to their next stop, as people tried to smuggle them out of the part of the country that was occupied by the Nazis, because the Nazis killed 450,000 Jewish Hungarians. In just a period of about 7 months, they shipped 450,000 Jewish Hungarians out of the country. And my grandmother was part of the movement that was trying their best to keep some of those people alive. So, and then so that's what my dad grew up with. And when he was 15, the revolution against the communists, against the Soviets, broke out on October 23rd, 1956. And so my dad, at 15 years old, he was throwing hand grenades at Soviet tanks. 15-year-old kid. You know, we talk about how people aren't growing up at 15. They're not growing up at 18. They're not growing up in their early 20s. Well, when you're forced to be grown up, you become grown up real quick. And that's what happened to my dad. And so after the revolution took place, a lot of weapons, a lot of hand grenades, a lot of ammunition were hidden. They were buried in oilcloths and bags of various sorts, because people were hoping that very shortly there would be another revolution. So March of 57 rolls around, and my dad is in high school, and what the Soviets did is they tried to rebuild the entire culture of the countries that they invaded. You know, we talk about how there's a war against religion in this country. Well, where do you think they got it from? They got it from the Soviets. That's exactly what the Soviets did. And my dad and his friends were singing this old Hungarian folk song about a guy who had to leave the love of his life and go to war. And one of the lines says, "Oh, my darling, God be with you. I have to leave you now." Well, the Soviet dominated government tried to change the words of this old folk song to, "Oh, my darling, for the homeland, I have to leave you now." And my father and his friends refused to sing that. They sang it the old way. And the teacher started yelling at them to stop singing it that way. And then the principal came and he was yelling at them. And next thing they know, their school was surrounded by tanks. Because this mighty empire, this mighty Soviet empire, was so afraid of teenage kids singing a song. And so my dad was arrested, and he was released to my grandmother's custody only because she was one of the top people at the local branch of the Hungarian National Bank, and she knew some folks. So he was released to her custody with a letter telling her that her son had to show up at a trial because, and this is what they wrote, he was participating in a fascist conspiracy to overthrow the revolution. Well, that night, my grandmother took my dad and her two young sons, 2 years old and 4 years old, and headed for the Yugoslav border, where they took most of the night to get through, slowly going just a few feet at a time, going from one hole to another because the entire border area had been dug deep with holes so people couldn't just run across. And spotlights were being shined all over the place. And somehow they made it across to Yugoslavia and spent over a year in refugee camps there before they ended up in Belgium. And then in 1962, they came to the United States, where my dad met my mom and where I was born. And I grew up with this. I grew up with my dad being the president of the American Hungarian Federation and teaching my brothers and my sister and myself about freedom and about liberty and about the culture from which he came. And I grew up knowing just how precious freedom is and how easily it can be taken from us. And the things we're seeing today here in the United States are terrifying. The things that are being done in the name of wokeness, in the name of liberalism, in the name of leftism, in the name of social justice, and all these other made-up terms that sound like they're coming straight out of Moscow, straight out of Orwell's 1984. These are the excuses. These are the excuses that they use to justify trampling all over our freedom. And we're not going to let them do it. We are not going to allow our freedom to be taken away. Now, those of you who are a little bit older like me, I'm in my 50s, you might remember a band from the 1980s called Mike and the Mechanics. It was a side project of Mike Rutherford of Genesis. And one of their songs was called Silent Running. And not a lot of people remember that song, but we conservatives, there's something in that song we should think about. We should remember. See, the song is about a not too distant future where despots, tyrants have taken over, dictators have taken over. And one of the verses goes, "Swear allegiance to the flag, whatever flag they offer. Never hint at what you really feel. Teach your children quietly, for someday sons and daughters will rise up and fight where we stood still." That song, those lines are a warning for what we must never do. We must never stand still. We must never sit down and accept it. We must never allow them to inherit a reality where they have to stand up and fight because we did not. We need to fight today. Not with guns, not with bombs, not with knives and fists, but with the full political system of this country, because it was built to be resilient. It was built to allow us to fight. It was built to resist dictators. And try as the left might, they cannot take over this country if we do not allow it. Something amazing has happened over the last 15 or so years since the election of Barack Obama. It started with the creation of the Tea Party, and it's moved on in the years since then to cause people to be enthusiastic about the cause of freedom. But one of the reasons that the Tea Party kind of sort of fell apart was because people kept looking at small victories and thinking that we had finally won the war. So in 2010, we took back Congress in a landslide. And in 2012, a lot of people thought there was no way Barack Obama could get reelected. So they sat back and they did nothing. And we lost. And in 2014, we took back Congress again. And everybody thought that this is it. We're finally going to be able to have a free country. And the Republican won in 2016. And then in 2018, we lost ground again. And in 2020, we lost ground again. And in 2022, we took back the House, but just barely, and not by the landslide that we were supposed to have. America doesn't need seasonal warriors. This is not Major League Baseball. This is not NFL football. This is not NHL hockey or NBA basketball. It's not seasonal. It's not about winning a championship one year and then being able to rest on our laurels. Thomas Jefferson told us eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And eternal means we don't get to rest. Eternal means we don't get to look for somebody who is going to take back our government for us and then we're done. It took 50 years or more, but at least 50 years since the late 60s to get into this mess. And it is going to take us decades to get out of it. And we have to fight every single election. And we have to look forward, not just 2 and 4 years. We have to have a plan for 8 years from now, for 12 years from now, for 20 years from now. We have to have a plan as to what we are going to leave our children so that they can pick up the baton and move forward and make the country even freer than the one we left them. Don't think that we're going to win this in the next election. Don't think we're going to win this in the election after that or the election after that. We've got a whole lot of fighting to do in order to not only make America free again, but to keep America free once we have that freedom. And it's not going to be one politician. It's not going to be a small group of politicians. It has to be us. We are the grassroots. We are the ones who have to keep the flame alive. We are the Republican Party. Now that doesn't mean that we just do things without thinking about them. It doesn't mean that we do things haphazardly. It doesn't mean that we don't look to gain experience and knowledge of the political system. That we can't think we don't have to think strategically. Of course we do. We got too many people these days who are jumping into politics and thinking they already know something because they've listened to a few podcasts. Not that I have a problem with podcasts. I'm doing one right now. but they've listened to a few podcasts. They've watched some YouTube videos, and they've gone on some Facebook groups, and they've kicked things around and read a few things on some fringe websites. That doesn't make for somebody who really understands the political system. And understanding the system is what we need. And there are a lot of people like to say, oh, there's the two parties. They don't matter. They're both the same. It doesn't matter if a Republican wins or a Democrat wins. They're all the same. No, they're not. There's a lot to fix in the Republican Party. But the Democrats can never be fixed. We may be a C- if we were graded on a report card in the Republican Party. But the Democrats are an F, and not 65%. They're like 19% F. They're way down at the bottom of the barrel where they can never be fixed. And we could point at some things and give proof as to what's the truth. The Republicans are the ones that made sure that we got new Supreme Court justices who have overturned Roe versus Wade, who overturned New York's anti-gun law and threw it out, New York City's, so that they cannot deny people the right to carry a firearm in the cities of this country anymore. It's Republicans who achieved that. All the major political victories of the last 20 years, last 40 years, really, 42 years since Ronald Reagan took office. All that was achieved by the Republican Party. The Republican Party is you and me. And yeah, there are some people in the Republican Party, both politicians and party leaders, that are not too savory individuals. They're not great people. And we might want to replace those people with better people. But there's also some really good people out there. I know here in the state of Florida that the leaders of the Republican Party, both on the county and on the state level, are good, believing conservatives. People who are patriots, people who love this country and the values on which it was built. And to lump those people in with the Democrats is blindness. There's a lot of good conservatives out there who are in the Republican Party, who are leading the Republican Party, and who need our support rather than our criticism in order to make sure that more people like them rise up into leadership positions in the party. The Republican and the Democrat Party are not the same. And on that note, some of us have heard, a lot of us have heard that over the last few days, some interesting things have happened in Congress. Adam Schiff and Eric Swalwell have been denied seats on the House Intelligence Committee. Why? Because the things that they did are seen to be harmful to the security interests of the United States of America. They seem to be harmful. That's what we, when you've got a situation where a congressman who is on the Intelligence Committee has some sort of unsavory relationship with someone who turns out to be a Chinese spy, I'm sorry, that person has no place on the Intelligence Committee. They just have no place on the Intelligence Committee, right? And then Ilhan Omar is running around screeching like a banshee because she's been removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee. And that means that she's not allowed to be on the subcommittee that she had been the chairman of previously, the Africa Committee. And she's running around saying that she is the only native-born African in the House, and she should be on that committee. Well, if you want to be on a Foreign Affairs Committee, maybe you ought to not go run around supporting terrorists who are attacking Israel. Maybe you want to not be running around saying that Israel is an apartheid system and making all kinds of ridiculous foreign affairs related statements. Because if you do that, you show that you don't belong on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Now, her statement is that her qualifications are based on where she is born, on her ethnicity. And I'm going to tell you something, folks. Being born in a particular place, being born with a particular ethnic background is not a qualification. It's just not a qualification. If that were the qualification, we would have to send as ambassadors to every country in the world somebody of that particular ethnic background. We could only send a Japanese person as an ambassador to Japan. We could only send a British person as the ambassador to Britain. We can only send a Hungarian person as the ambassador to Hungary. And what happens if we don't have a qualified person of that background? So trying to set that as a standard is a fool's errand. And it's just another example of Democrat identity politics, where the only thing that matters is, are you straight or gay? Are you black, white, brown, yellow, whatever skin color they come up with? Are you third world? Are you the same gender that you were born? Are you a male? Are you a female? Are you older? Are you younger? They want to put us in all these little boxes, and each one of us is supposed to be loyal to the box that we're in. That's identity politics. And that's why they run around saying that conservative blacks are traitors to African Americans. That's why they can't stand the idea of conservative gay people. That's why they can't stand the fact that more and more Jewish Americans are becoming conservative Republicans, because they see that the Democrat Party is a party filled with anti-Semites like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, who run around saying that Israel is an apartheid state, which is complete nonsense, by the way. They are liars. Anybody who says Israel is an apartheid state is a liar. There's absolutely no basis in fact for that sort of thing. And anybody who's taken any time to study the history of Israel and how Israel became the great democracy of the Middle East will be able to see that there's no truth to that. All Israel wants is to make sure that her citizens are defended, protected against those who want to kill Jews in the Middle East. That's all they want. And all they're doing is making sure that those protections which are necessary for Israel to be able to defend her citizens are in place. That's it. That's all they want. Maybe next week we'll take a little time and talk about the history of how Israel came to be and how her neighbors continually kept launching wars against Israel. Okay, and then how things changed at Camp David in the late 1970s and at the Oslo Accords and so forth. So maybe we'll get into that next week if we have a little bit of time. Right now we're just going to go through and look at all the new news articles, news items that are in the news today. Okay, so now we went from Congress. Let's take a look at what's going on in the White House. The Biden administration's border policies are now being reported to be facing a backlash from Democrats in addition to Republicans. Oh my goodness. Democrats in big cities in America where all these asylum seekers, migrants, refugees, that's what they like to call them. I don't like any of those words. I certainly don't like the word immigrant, because real immigrants, they wait their turn and they come here legally. These people aren't immigrants. They're squatters. They're invaders. They're interlopers. They don't belong here in this country because they didn't follow the rules in coming here. They don't have the right to be in the United States. They just don't. So they need to, we need to have a very different way of looking at them. And apparently a lot of Democrats are changing their views. A lot of Democrats are changing their views, especially in the big cities where tens of thousands of these migrants are ending up. And let's be honest, the Democrats are trying very hard to try to make it sound like the only reason that there are so many migrants going to these states is that the Republican governors of Florida and Texas are sending them there by bus. Well, that's not true. People are going to cities like New York and Los Angeles and Chicago and Boston and Philadelphia because in those states, the social welfare safety net is so extensive that people can go there and apply for social services their first week there. And they get all kinds of food stamps and health insurance and money for Section 8 housing and so forth. And they can get by without having to work for a long time. And that's why these folks are going there. That's why these refugees are going to those cities. Some of them end up being taken there by bus, but a lot more are going there hitchhiking or paying for a bus ticket themselves or walking there or finding some way to get there because that's where they have a way of surviving. And it's not fair to the taxpayers of those cities and those states. It's not fair to job seekers in those cities and states who are losing out because all these people from other countries are going there and they're taking jobs at a lower price, lower wages than the native-born citizens, or not even native-born citizens. Could be immigrant citizens, but then the citizens and the green card holders, those who are here legally, then they would take for those jobs. So now you've got the politicians there saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we have to pay for tens of thousands of more people than we budgeted for. In some cases, hundreds of thousands. We have to pay for all these social services. How are we going to do this?" And they're criticizing the Biden administration for the rules changes that have taken place in the last 2 years, and they're demanding money from the federal government. Well, the federal government can't just get money. They either have to tax us, they have to borrow against the future, or they have to print money through the Fed, the Federal Reserve, which means that the value of our money goes down, and that's basically an invisible tax on the rest of us. The increase in gas prices, the increase in groceries, the increase in our cost of living over the last 3 years has happened because of irresponsible spending by the federal government and by the states as well, but primarily by the federal government. So now these liberals who are running these cities are demanding money, and what they want is for the federal government to find a way to take it from those of us who live in responsible cities and states and give it up and send it up to them. Because whether they print money or they tax us, it's coming from us in places like Florida, in places like Texas, in places like Mississippi, in places like South Carolina, places further west. And they want to send it to cities in Massachusetts, in New York State, in California, in Washington, in Oregon, in Illinois, in Minnesota, in places where the liberals hold sway and are holding out their hands saying, "Come on up here." They've been calling on these asylum seekers, these refugees, these illegal aliens to go up to their cities for a long time now. And suddenly they don't have the money. They don't have the money to support all these people. And we're supposed to pay for it? Those of us in the rest of the country? Come on. Come on. That's ridiculous. And speaking of that, Rasmussen just released a poll just today that more than half of Americans say they pay too much in taxes. 51% of Americans say that they pay too much in taxes. Are you kidding me? It takes a poll to figure this out? Yeah, we pay too much in taxes. I'll tell you something else. People who don't pay any income taxes still pay too much in taxes They're paying taxes in the form of fuel taxes. They're paying taxes in sales taxes. They're paying taxes of all sorts. Property taxes if they own property. Property taxes if they don't own property and they rent, because that's part of their rent. They're paying taxes that are hidden in the price of their food, because income taxes are being paid by the manufacturers of that food, the producers of that food. Folks who don't pay any taxes are still paying too much in taxes. Folks who do pay taxes are paying way too much. And the wealthy in this country, the 1% who pay the majority of our taxes, you can't even explain how it's possible that those people could be paying the majority of our taxes, and yet the Democrats are running around saying that they're not paying their fair share. Let me tell you, somebody who's paying millions of dollars in taxes a year, he's paying his fair share. There is no question that he is paying his fair share. Leona Helmsley, who got in so much trouble years ago for paying less taxes than the Democrats wanted her to pay, paid her fair share. Everybody pays something. Most people, almost everybody pays too much, and the rich pay far more than their quote unquote fair share. So Rasmussen surveyed 1,000 Americans. There's a margin of error of plus or minus 3 points. Now here's the interesting part. 52% of Republicans say that they pay more than their fair share. Okay, fine. 50% of Democrats say they pay too much in taxes. 50% of Democrats say they pay too much in taxes. Are you kidding me? How is it that the Democrat Party gets away with everybody when half of their voters say they pay too much in taxes? It's insane. It's complete insanity. We can't keep going like this. We absolutely cannot keep going like this. We are paying too much. Everybody is paying too much. Not just the wealthy. Not even the wealthy and the middle class. Even the poor in America are paying too much. And this is what we have to get across to these poor voters. The ones who are being bribed by the Democrats. They're being bribed in order to get their votes. They're trying to buy their votes. We have to somehow get this point across to those people that the Democrat Party is stealing money from them. They're not really giving them something free. They're stealing money from them. They're overtaxing them because their food and everything else costs too much. In any instance, a lot of what is going to be happening in the U.S. actually it comes down to the states. So what's going on in the states in the U.S.? Well, here's an interesting thing. Virginia House Republicans and the Virginia House of Representatives, they voted down gun control measures after recent shootings on school campuses. The Democrats will take any opportunity, no matter how tragic, to turn it into a gun control, to an excuse for gun control. No matter how tragic, no matter how many people die, they will ghoulishly exploit those deaths in order to try to bring about gun control. And the Virginia state legislature has decided they are not going to pass new gun control measures. And you've got a great governor up there right now, Glenn Youngkin, who is also not going to allow gun control measures to be instituted. Then on the other end of the political spectrum, we've got the Minnesota State Senate trying to create more protections, quote unquote, I got this in air quotes, for the so-called right to have an abortion. Now, there's been a lot of talk about abortion in the last, not quite a year since the first reports of the Supreme Court decision came out early and illegally. Abortion has really made the news a lot over the last, let's say, year. And we need to really clarify this whole situation. A lot of people will say that abortion is a so-called social issue. Well, abortion is not a social issue. Abortion is a human rights issue. It's very important that we clarify that. It is not about the government stepping in and taking away people's rights. It is not about the government creating more power for itself. One of the primary reasons we have a government is to ensure that people do not murder people. It's very simple. Human beings are not allowed to murder other human beings. That's not a social issue. It's no more a social issue to protect an unborn child from murder than it is to protect somebody walking down the street from being shot in the head. There is no nuance there. There is no difference. It's not a gray area. It's not kind of sort of murder to abort a baby. Abortion is murder in all of its aspects. You cannot be a true conservative and not demand that the government protect all human beings in the territory of the United States from being murdered. From the first instant of conception to the day that they die naturally. All people should receive exactly the same protection against murder. There are no exceptions to this. The fact that somebody may have been attacked, assaulted, treated in a monstrous, atrocious manner, and raped does not create a new right to murder the child that resulted from rape. Rape, incest, fetal abnormalities, the desire of the mother to go to school, the desire of the mother to advance her career, pressure being put on the mother by the father who is a married guy and doesn't want his wife to know. Nothing that you can name is a legitimate excuse for abortion. Okay, this is a question of balance. The only thing you can balance against a human life is another human life. You cannot create a scenario in which abortion is acceptable. Period. It's that simple. Abortion is murder. Abortion is evil. Abortion is not beneficial to our society. It's not beneficial to individuals. It destroys human life. It destroys the soul of the person who is involved in it. It is in all ways a despicable, evil, dark act, comparable to the genocides of the great dictators of the 20th century. And it cannot be excused. It cannot be supported. And one cannot be a conservative and somehow make an excuse for abortion. Period. It's that simple. So I'm sure by now some of you have heard that Ronna McDaniel has been reelected for an unprecedented fourth term as chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. Now, a lot of people have strong opinions about whether or not she should have been reelected. The reality is that none of her challengers really had the kind of support, the kind of gravitas to be able to mount a strong challenge to her. Mike Lindell, that candidacy was a joke. There was no way the guy was going to get anywhere. He got 4 votes altogether. Ronna McDaniel got 111 out of 168. I mean, it was a massive blowout. Harmeet Dillon one of her challengers got 51 committee members voting for her. That means that Ronna McDaniel got more than twice as much as as her next challenger. There was no chance that she wasn't going to win. Now we can complain about it. We can talk about how somebody else should have won, and maybe somebody else should have. But the fact is, there was nobody running who had that kind of political clout that he or she could have won. So we somehow need to, if we want to change the way the Republican Party works, if we want to change things for the better, if we have a problem with a particular person who's running the party, who's chairing the party, we need to become more active, we need to become more vocal, and we need to find better candidates. As it was, this is what's going to happen. So now our one choice is to put pressure on Ronna McDaniel to make sure that she supports the most conservative possible candidates for the various races around the country, that she leads this party into a more conservative direction. That's where our next steps have to lie. But just like with Kevin McCarthy, a lot of people thought he was going to be a namby-pamby, semi-liberal, moderate type of Republican speaker. And he's turned out to be a very powerful, strong force for conservative values over the last few weeks. Now, could that change? Yes, of course it can. But right now, because of the kind of pressure that Republicans around the country placed on their own congressmen, on the opinions that were made known in these various opinion polls, McCarthy is really pushing himself to the right. And the same could be true of Ronna McDaniel if we make our feelings known. If we go out on Twitter, if we go out on Facebook, if we send emails, if we send snail mail, if we do all sorts of things to make her and the rest of the state committee, national committeemen know that we insist that the Republican Party become more conservative, it will be. We complain about the Republican Party not being conservative enough. That is our fault. We are the ones who are not putting the pressure on them. And running around quoting conspiracy theories and making up stories and telling people that the Republican Party and the Democrat Party are the same, that's not going to change anything. We need to put direct pressure on those who are the decision makers, on our state committeemen, our state committeewomen, our state chairman of the Republican Party. We can use our county committees to make our opinions known. In a lot of places, the county committees are extremely conservative, very conservative indeed. It is up to us to make it understood that that we need to become a more conservative party. And there is a sign that that this is working. The Republican National Committee just approved overwhelmingly a resolution condemning anti-Semitism. And that's extremely important because the Republican Party has to be the party that supports Israel. We have to be the party that supports the plight of the Jewish people around the world. Anti-Semitism in this world is becoming more and more prevalent. The stories about the Rothschilds, the idea that Jews somehow control the financial structure of the world, all these crazy conspiracy theories, these things need to be put to rest. Let the Democrats come out and make up stories about the Jews. We don't need to do that because we know that these stories are not true. We know that Jewish Americans are every bit as much patriotic, conservative, value-believing Americans as Christians are. And for us to countenance any sort of division between Jews and Christians just because people are making up conspiracy theories, just because there are certain big name stars out there who are just speaking nonsense about Jews. And I'm not just talking about Kanye West. There are others out there among the celebrities, especially those who are supporters of the so-called Palestinian plight. We cannot be anti-Semitic. We have to be the opposite. We have to be the ones who say, we see the Jewish people as being the same Americans as the non-Jewish people. If we cannot do that, then we are not really believers in the values of this nation. We do not believe in equality. We do not believe in freedom if we're going to make those kinds of distinctions. Allow the Democrats to be the ones who make identity-based distinctions. We do not do that. On a global level, on an international level, America's one true ally in the world today is Israel. England to some extent, the United Kingdom to some extent. Yeah, okay. We've got some NATO allies in Europe who sometimes will be on our side, sometimes won't. But the only true ally, come hell or high water, that the United States has is Israel. We have to come to terms with that. We have to understand that the Israeli people and the Jewish people here in America are good people who believe the same things that the non-Jewish people believe. They are our friends. They are our brothers and sisters. And in fact, we shouldn't even be using the words they and us. They are us. Jewish and Christian Americans are the same people. And we need to stop with the nonsense. We need to be the strong party, the strong conservative movement that defends Jewish people from attacks by the lunatics, the Nazis, the skinheads, the Aryan Nation, the Islamist extremists, the morons on the left who are running around claiming that Israel is an apartheid state. We have to make sure that we take the right side in these arguments. We must do that. It is the only way that we can be principled in the way we defend our national values. It's the only way. There is no other way. And here's the proof. Right? Just a few hours ago, it was reported that a shooting spree or killing spree happened in a synagogue in Jerusalem. 7 people dead, 3 injured. Hamas has taken credit for this disgusting, despicable attack. Unbelievable. It's a 21-year-old Hamas terrorist walked into a synagogue in East Jerusalem and opened fire on people who are engaged in their Friday night prayers. If there is no other indication of how evil anti-Semitism is, it is the fact that he's not even human. I don't know what to call somebody who does this. This creature attacked people, killed people while they were praying, while they were worshiping, while they were praising God. He walked in and killed them. And Israeli police engaged him in a firefight when he tried to flee, and they killed him. 7 people killed, 3 people injured, 10 people altogether dead or attacked, wounded. The dead included men between the ages of 20 and 60, a 60-year-old woman, Others died at the hospital. We are in a world war against the extremism of Islam, against those who call themselves Muslims and spend their lives filled with hatred, plotting evil. We saw it a little over 20 years ago when we were attacked on September 11th, 2001. We've watched it happen over and over and over again in Israel, in Europe, here in the United States, in places like California, and even here in Florida. It's horrific. And we have to stand up and say, no more. We will not accept this anymore. And we will absolutely stand by the Jewish people in Israel and here in the United States and make sure that nobody attacks them. There was a man in Germany named Martin Niemöller who famously talked about how when they came for one group or another, he didn't say anything because he wasn't part of that group. He wasn't Jewish. He wasn't Catholic. He wasn't this. He wasn't that. And they came for this group and that group. And he didn't say anything because he wasn't one of them. And he ended his little quote by saying, when they came for me, there was nobody left to stand up. There was nobody left to stand up. We cannot be those people. We cannot be the people who say, it is none of our business. When people are attacked by evil, it is our business. Whether it's our neighbor, somebody across the state, somebody across the country, no matter where it happens, it is our business because people of goodwill, people of faith, act to stop evil. To not do so is the epitome of selfishness. It's the epitome of selfishness. Well, folks, this was the first edition of Right Time Reborn. I got to tell you, I'm a little surprised that I was able to make it through an hour of talking without a co-host. I'm used to, even when I was on the radio and I was used to things, I had Ed, the greatest co-host anybody could want, to play off of. We riffed on each other. We had this dynamic chemistry, and it was a lot of fun. And I hope to be able to do that with Ed again. But until we can make that work, until we can figure out the technology of it, I'm going to keep doing this every week. I hope that you folks will return. I hope more and more of you will listen. We're going to be adding some more programs to this. This one's audio only, but we'll have once a week a 10-minute politics video podcast. We'll have a religious podcast. We're going to add more and more material to the Right Time Reborn family. And we'll see where it goes. And I hope that more and more of you will be around to participate in this or to listen to this podcast and participate. And we'll have an email system set up soon in order to give you a way of interacting with the show. And this is it. Our hour is up. I will see you or talk to you again next Friday. And I've had a lot of fun. This was a little rough, by the way. It was the first time in 11 years. It'll get better, believe me. All right, folks. Bye now.